Hello everybody, I'm Nora Burrows. I was reading Old Swedish Quilts. This is a book that includes old Swedish quilts from, the 1800s, late 1700s, and the stories that go along with them. It's a good read. I like it. I don't know if I'd recommend it for everybody. It's a little bit slow, but I was wondering if, quilts in America were really starting to become a thing in the late 1700s, early 1800s. And a lot of these quilts from Sweden in this book are also from around that same time. And I wondered if two separate places so far away, if they would be creating similar quilts or whether the patterns would be totally different if the quilts of Sweden had like wild and crazy blocks that, the American quilts were different from. So, and I thought that was probably true. I thought that's the way it would be. And it wasn't. It's funny because almost all the Swedish quilts are like the same traditional blocks as traditional American quilt blocks. And I think that's because a lot of people in Sweden at the time were immigrating over to America and then coming back to Sweden, and that's also a theory that, I don't know, that's just what I think. That's what they kind of imply in the book. One of the stories in this book is about a deaf mute named Mari Erickson who was born in 1863, and she would go on her skis with one ski pole and a basket and travel around her neighborhood to collect little pieces of fabric. She'd knock on people's door and people would put little bits of fabric into her basket, and then she would make 8-pointed star blocks out of these fabric bits. Here are a couple of her quilts. There's a picture of her. It's rare that so many quilts would be surviving from one person that long ago, but they think part of the reason that so many of her quilts survived is because she would make so many of them, and people in the town loved them so much. They loved the fact that they would give her these little scraps. She'd make all of these quilts and then they would buy the quilts from her, that because it was kind of just a thing to have and do, that a lot of people kept them, and they were kind of scattered throughout the town, and so they survived. I think she made a ton, and so this is just a couple survived, but they're all 8-pointed stars. So 8-pointed stars were in my head, hand piecing these 8-pointed stars, and then I came across this amazing story of this deaf mute on skis with one ski pole and a basket collecting fabric from neighbors to make 8-pointed stars, which I think is an amazing historical story. And I love her name, Mari Erickson. That's like, I think her name is Maria Erickson, but they call her Mari. So in honor of Mari, I am making all of my 8-pointed stars are going to be dedicated to Mari. And I've made 2. I love them. I hand pieced them. Here's one. There's like these little birds. And the pattern that I used for these 8-pointed stars, I used a YouTube video from the woman from Laundry Basket Quilts. I'm forgetting her name. Edyta Sitar. That's what it is. Edyta Sitar has a YouTube channel. She also makes a ton of fabric. She's a wonderful person, a wonderful quilter. She has a business empire. Anyway, I used her 8-pointed star tutorial. I think she did it in partnership with the Fat Quarter Shop. So it's the woman from the Fat Quarter Shop with Edyta Sitar, which is another funny thing in this quilting universe, is without even really realizing it at all. I used this bird fabric, which is Edyta Sitar's bird fabric. And so somewhere in my brain, I knew that it was Edyta's, and then I used Edyta Sitar's YouTube video tutorial to do these blocks. So there's one, and then the other one is this little mushroom one. I think they're just so fun. Look at this seam here. It's just so flat. Like, this is kind of flat, right? But it's not like all that flat. This is the machine done part. But all the pieces that, look at that center, how flat that's laying. It's just, I think it's because of the hand piecing. That's my theory. And same with the other one. Again, look how flat this lies. I would never be able to have this lay so flat if it was machine pieced. So what I wanted to say about the Y seams, I truly do not understand why people are so fearful of the Y seams. It makes absolutely no sense to me. You just sew it the way that they tell you to sew it. It's like literally no big deal. And I think when you're hand sewing Y seams, it's like super easy breezy, even easier than machine quilting Y seams, which is probably why they recommend the 8-pointed stars for a good hand sewing project. So I encourage all of you to make some 8-pointed stars in honor of Mari Erickson. Let's keep her history alive. I have another book to share with you. This one is a pretty famous book. It was published, let's see when it was published. It was published in 1987, and what I've been told by numerous quilters is that this is a book that should live on any quilter's bookshelf, that it's one of the best historical quilt books of all time. It's called Heart and Hands: The Influence of Women and Quilts on American Society. I was not as impressed. Perhaps it's because my expectations were kind of high, because I had heard about this book from a variety of people who all raved about it. But one of the authors is Julie Silber, who's one of the 6 quilt know-it-alls. You remember a couple episodes ago I was telling you about the 6 know-it-alls and their YouTube videos on, you know, historical quilts are fantastic. Anyway, this one of the women who wrote this book is one of the 6 know-it-alls. So this was okay. I didn't learn an awful lot that I didn't already know. It really focuses around the women's suffrage movement and, you know, quilts that were happening at that time, but it doesn't even really specify all that much on, you know, a couple specific quilts. It's more about generally what was happening around that time and how viewpoints about quilting were changing. Women didn't want to do needlework so much anymore. They were actually quite opposed to it because they felt that, you know, it was something that they were being expected and forced to do, and all kinds of things that you can read about in this book. What I found to be more interesting was around the westward movement. They focused in the beginning of the book about women in the westward movement and what that experience was kind of like for them, and I did enjoy that. Would I recommend this book? I don't know. I mean, I guess it's worth a read. I'm glad I read it. It focuses a lot on people, right, around the time. Like, they have some great photos of people, but then it doesn't, like this quilt doesn't match this photo. There's no lasting quilts of that woman. They actually don't even know who that woman is. And that seems to be a theme throughout the book. Like, you know, there is some really cool stuff in here. Like, these pictures are all of women doing needlework of some kind. I think that one of their husbands was a photographer or something, and so they think that he just set up the camera and took pictures of all of them. You know, there's a lot of pictures of historical women who were important, not necessarily in quilting, but in the suffrage movement. That's kind of a cool thing. They made a good point, which I hadn't noticed until recently, but a lot of these pictures of marketing pictures around like thread and cotton with the slaves picking the cotton. A lot of that marketing, most of the marketing of the time, which seems obvious but just didn't occur to me until they actually said it, where all of the slaves picking the cotton and using the cotton gin are all like smiling and happy, and they're out in the fields and having a good time, and it just, you know, obviously was so not the case. That's an understatement. I mean, it was a horrific situation, and in all of these marketing campaigns, they're making it look, you know, they're trying to sell a product. You know, this is like one of the westward expansion photos, which is like a super cool photo. I love this picture, but it has nothing to do with quilts, right? It's just talking about what it was like for them on that adventure, and a picture of these people, but there's no quilts in the picture, and there's no record of these people making quilts. So I think that kind of thing just kind of irritated me a little bit. This is awesome. You all may have seen this quilt before. So this quilt was made by Mary Todd Lincoln's seamstress, who was a former slave, and all of these little pieces were made out of remnants of Mary Todd Lincoln's dresses and garments. And the former slave, the seamstress, her name is Elizabeth Keckley. This is a picture of her. And she was the daughter of a slave, and her father was the master. So I've read the whole book. You know, I think there's a lot in here, you know, there's a lot of good stuff. Again, no quilts in this picture. It's only about what was happening in this time of the women's suffrage movement, which is a really interesting time, really important information. Anyway, thank you for joining me. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next Monday. Bye.